G'day folks, and welcome to another episode of Euro Mining News. You're with your host John Franklin. Now today we'll be discussing an interesting rare earths element project which is unfolding in southwest Finland in and around an old abandoned lead mine. And this is a classic case of an old unloved project receiving a bit of fresh love, basically looking for a new commodity. With this shifting focus coming from the cyclical nature of our commodity prices together with technological advancements and geopolitical issues, i.e. China controlling too much of the rare earth space. Now, I'm here today with the Managing Director of Prospech Limited, who's got over 30 years experience as a geo, Jason Beckton. Jason, welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you, John, and thanks for your interest. Well, how do you say good middag?
Tack själv, säger jag.
Yeah, Swedish is where we are, but Finland's a country. Anyway, far away.
Absolutely. So, yeah, as everyone knows, Jason is over in Australia. I'm in Sweden, so we've got a bit of a time difference, but it looks like it's sunny in both areas. Now, to start off with, Jason, just wanted to know why did you get involved in Finland and Slovakia, and what caught your eye about the Finnish project in the first place?
Well, junior companies, John, are inherently full of risk, explorers in particular, so we try to mitigate risk. So first thing was a geographic filter, which I'm a big believer in. We don't expose shareholders to difficult jurisdictions where you can potentially lose the assets. So both in the EU, in Slovakia and Finland, have had a long history of foreign investment, particularly Finland. And we have had no difficulties in the past. I've been a director now for 10 years of the company, no difficulties in Europe with that side of things yet. But really what drives value is quality, in my view, for junior companies, brownfield assets. I stress we're not a greenfields explorer. We look at things that have been defined and try to grow them, assemble value out of the good work of others.
Definitely.
You go, sorry.
So with onto that brownfields, your project in Finland is the Korsnas project. It definitely fits the bill of brownfields based on the fact that it was actually an old mine. However, mining a completely different commodity, lead. So how did you figure out in the first place that there were rare earth elements involved in this, and kind of how did the discovery unfold?
Well, really, the discovery, of course, made by others in the 50s and 60s, they knew back then there were rare earth elements in this ore material, sulfide veins, basically, with calcite, and their good geophysical work also after prospecting through the good work of entire communities, prospecting on weekends, things like that, through the till cover, come up with this discovery at Korsnas. And importantly, since the 60s, the state mining company and then Outokumpu recorded the rare earth numbers. They knew that they were there. They weren't ignorant of that, but it wasn't economic at the time when they focused on the lead. So to answer your question, everything was recorded in the GTK databases, and we'll get to it shortly, I guess, and preserved in the GTK drill core libraries. So therein lies the opportunity, is a good jurisdiction such as Finland where they preserve the information for others.
Absolutely, yeah. So for people watching, GTK is the Geological Survey of Finland, and like you say, they do a fantastic job of preserving that core. So you've managed to get a hold of how many drill holes were drilled into this previously?
Well, it changes because it's such a big database, but at the moment we believe there's 471 historic drill holes, and we've managed to sample a little under half of those, the priority ones. So therein lies an ongoing job in the background, but in the meantime you have to draw a line through the important ones and get that done and move towards the ultimate goal, which is the interim JORC resource estimate. But that's why shareholders, past and future, see ongoing drill results. And importantly, the core, some of it since the 50s, but most of it in the 60s and 70s, has been very well preserved in a zero humidity environment in southern Finland at Lopi, the GTK library, which is library, I think, is the best word because you can't take the core. That's why it's still well preserved. Yep. You can sample it. and of course provide the data back to the government, and then we provide that data as we generate it to the stock market. And so far so good. You know, we like numbers over 1% total rare earth, and so far so good. You know, shareholders should expect to see more of that, both old and new.
Okay, great. So you've basically accumulated that old historic core, sampled it, and got results that you were above what you were expecting. Now, because this core was 50 plus years old, you've actually twinned a bunch of those holes to make sure that they are where they say they are. Can you use that old core into your mineral resource estimate, or are you going to have to re-drill most of those holes?
No, so we estimate the value of that old drilling to be roughly 16 million Aussie worth, or call it 10 million euros worth of drilling. And it is valuable because, yes, you can use the material, but mainly because the assays are fresh and new.
Yep.
Because an important point here is most of the core was not sampled. When they were exploring, and they do a good job, they found all the trends, but what they found, in fact, were rare earth zones while they were looking for lead zones mainly. But in their disappointment in the 60s and 70s, Outokumpu, they would see there's no lead in the core. So most of the core remained whole. So the first time we went there in April 2023, I was reasonably nervous that there'd be any core left at all. But the point was the core was picked through in the past with some recent studies, but mainly picked through in the past for lead. And if they drilled a hole with a little bit of lead, but a lot of rare earths, which is commonly what we find, they would leave it whole. And look, I don't judge that. I was the same as a young geologist in Broken Hill, a large base metal deposit in Australia. You can visually see roughly what the percentages are in base metals. You can't, of course, with rare earths. It's just white material with apatite. And so combination of serendipity, I guess, but not really. It was good planning by the past operators to preserve all that core. They knew it had some residual value. The other point, before I forget, is to bring up the other good jurisdiction piece, is the local municipality in Korsnas, as well as the mine museum, because they didn't actually have to allow us to work in the middle of the mine itself. That was a protected municipal area. Now we have a deal, and we're allowed to explore the whole area as a contiguous block. So I just want to make that point. It's not just the federal authorities in Finland, it was also the local authorities and the volunteer organisation looking after the historic mine data set, which we're still collating because it's immense.
Yep.
All of these rich data sources we're putting together for the end goal, because it's not a PhD, we want to end up with a resource in the end and see how we go.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. So as far as talking about what you've got available at the moment, you've obviously got your material that's in the base rock, so that's sitting in the ground basically, your rare earths there, but you've also got access to two other ore sources. Could you tell us a bit about those two?
So the tailings dam was preserved and also carefully monitored in the 50 years since operation stopped in the early 70s. Importantly, we were able to secure a permit to clear the tailings dam of regrowth vegetation and drill it in February. And we have published an exploration target on that. We want to increase the level of confidence to inferred JORC. It's under 1 million tonnes at about 0.5% rare earths, which is what you can quickly assume from a volumetric calculation. But importantly, it is, of course, free dig. And that means that explosives won't have to be used to reprocess this old tailings dam. That's exactly what the EU and Finnish government want people to do. They want them to make use of these old tailings dams to return them potentially to a better state environmentally. So there is an environmental angle apart from the obvious use of rare earths in climate safe batteries. You need to demonstrate a plan to process this tailings, and that's our current objective in parallel with the main goal of the hard rock, but also a lanthanide dump, as you mentioned in your earlier briefing as well. that needs more drilling as well, and we'll define that in due course.
Great. So yeah, you've got those three separate options. As far as, like you mentioned, with the EU, with the Critical Raw Materials Act that came in April of this year, mentioning that they want to recycle as much as possible on top of becoming self-sufficient. You've actually managed to get some funding from the EU REMHUB to assist. Could you tell us how much money you got and what can you use that money for?
Well, it's approximately 450,000 euros, and that is targeted towards the metallurgical test work, which we was just talking about a little bit. Not mainly for the hard rock source, but also for the tailings. We've already got the metallurgical samples ready for the tailings, and we're just about to select for the hard rock because we finished the drilling in September. So that is specifically working on recovering the rare earth oxides of interest, because as you know, not all of them are of rare interest. We're interested in the PR and NdPr and terbium rare earths, which are the valuable rare earths, or the magnet rare earths as they're called, and they're in levels, without going into specific numbers, they're in levels that are interesting. We also need to make sure that any processing solution is viable where we are. It is an industrial area, that's fine, but we being assisted right now by mining school Oulu and GTK Mintech. So we within weeks, or I should say a month to be accurate, an exec director will go to Finland to finalise the selection of the samples for the metallurgical test work. And that work can then be refunded by REMHUB, the CLIC consortia out of Helsinki that did a good job putting all the companies together. And I like the transparent way they run. You do the work first and you get refunded for it. So that way the funds are well controlled, and it's not just a slush fund, it's very targeted kind of work. So we look forward to being involved in that and other EU initiatives. I mean, we're guests there, obviously, apart from the fact we encourage more EU ownership of the stock. So yeah, we look forward to working with the EU grant people at CLIC.
Congratulations. Yeah, I mean, that's of mutual interest for both of you. So it's good to see that you're getting tapped into those funds. And speaking of funds, you've just mentioned that you're going to be doing another raise. How much are you planning on raising, and what do you want to use those funds for?
So the entitlement issue, which we announced yesterday, or the day before yesterday, I should say, in the presentation yesterday, the entitlement issue is targeted for mainly Finland Korsnas work. Also, we want to put some effort into the Jockey Kangas rare earth property further north, as well as our gold silver interests in Slovakia, given that we just pegged a new porphyry copper gold zone south of the operating mine at Rosalia, which I hasten to add we don't own, but it's a very profitable gold silver mine in the Western Tethian of Slovakia, where we still maintain an exploration effort. So yes, it is an offering of rare earth development. However, we maintain that option, if you like, on gold silver. Importantly, our small team pivot between Finland and Slovakia, so there's no doubling up of effort, if you like. And generally, we operate one project at a time. Until the time comes, we'll grow things more. But for now, the funds will be spread, I would say, 80 Finland, perhaps 20 Slovakia, as per the use of funds in the prospectus. Importantly, it's a rights issue or an entitlement issue, so that's the most equitable form of fundraising you can do on the ASX. High documentation, yet it's the equitable way, and we hope to close that by mid-November.
Great. So then you'll be cashed up, able to really drill this Korsnas project out to produce this resource. So I guess for timeframes, I know it's always hard to put a number on these things, but when should we be expecting an initial resource and those metallurgical test results?
I think the initial resource, given that it'll be the lowest category of confidence inferred JORC, should be by the end of the month. I know that's aggressive, or I would say, let's say within the first week of November, and then after that, the metallurgical test work will be ongoing, really. There'll be signposts that we tell the market about. We don't have warehouse results. And I think a point I skipped over earlier, importantly, we don't have to use shareholders' funds to re-drill this thing out. And as I've done in the past in southern Chile, at a copper project, we drilled about 10% new holes amongst all the old holes. And if the data matches, it rehabilitates those old holes. So that was the purpose of the recent drilling program when I was there for August and September, which we completed. And it looks statistically like the new assays from the old holes match the new assays from the new holes.
Yeah.
And so that was important because most of the old holes are slightly narrower core than what we just completed. Very thick HQ core is what we just did. We've quarter cored all that core. Most of the half core will go for metallurgical test work. Quarter went to the lab. There was some duplicate work. So, we're following all the usual procedures without snowing your viewers with nomenclature. But so far, it looks like it's a good replication of the new assays from the old core, and therefore we can use that data. We're not re-logging the core, I hasten to add. It was logged in an excellent manner by Outokumpu geologists in the past. So it hasn't been an onerous task. We just sample where we see the rare earths in a sort of a factory-like way.
Fantastic. I can't. Me coming from a geology background as well, there's been so many times where we've gone to twin an old drill hole and it hasn't been where it's said it's going to be, just due to database changes or something that's happened with changes over time. So if you have twinned these holes and they're all showing mineralization where they said they were, that's great that you can have confidence in that old database. So that's a big tick.
Sure.
So seeing as we are both geos, we might as well talk a bit about the geology here. So you mentioned that they're 45 degree approximately dipping carbonatites with a potential skarn. If you just, without going into too much detail, maybe just give us a quick run through of the geology.
So it's interesting because, we've just come off some years, we're still working on very young rocks in the Western Tethyan of approximately 32 million years and 16 million year old mineralisation to mineralisation that's more in the order of 500 million years old. It hasn't been moved around a lot. You've got these one discordant vein was mined, Svartaren, for the lead mine, but there's probably 6 parallel veins of low lead but high rare earths in parallel, which generally, because of their dip, they're kind of perfect in a way for mining. I mean, engineers prefer steeper zones to gravity to help the mining process, not to jump too far ahead. But what I like to see is repeated zones, because you end up with a thing called tonnes per vertical metre increasing. What planning engineers don't like to do is put down a new adit for every vein. So what we think we'll do is some kind of development underground drill out process that accesses all 5 parallel zones, mainly from an underground perspective. I think most of this will have an underground mining solution in the future. These are repeated discordant calcite veins, which are blended together with the lead and rare earth events, and they are visually distinct from the host rock. So you don't need to be a crack geologist to pick out where the zones are. That was important. We were reasonably nervous when we first logged the core. And again, thanks to GTK for sending some of their experts, such as Exceli Torpi and others, to just guide us through what to sample and what not to sample. But what I like to see in an ore zone is minimal disruption after the mineralised event, because so it's not dissected with later dikes coming over the top. And importantly, the mineralisation of the rare earth event appears to be quite young in the process, late, and therefore undisturbed. So that goes to continuity, which again goes to risk and building up decent inventory. So for me, geologically, I don't want to simplify it, but you're talking about repeated stacked zones of sometimes horizontal width, which is what miners talk about, of about 20 metres, but average, to be fair, of about 7 metres thickness. And what we want to see is zones in that above 1% rare earths, which obviously all of it won't be. There are some lower grade zones.
Yep.
But importantly, we model it all geologically, and then we run the lower cuts through the entire geological block model.
Great. It's good to hear that there's no minimal post mineralization offsets and boudinaging and those type of things that can strip out those ore tons. That's great. Now, as far as your mineralogy, do you know what rare earth element minerals are hosting the rare earths?
Yeah, so we had a very good study recently completed by a master's student focused on that very problem or important task. Neil van Kerkhoff up at University, escapes me, in Belgium, Leuven, KU Leuven. And he did a great job, and that really de-risked the project for us. And in terms of most of it, it's apatite, which is a phosphate, and that's important. Because that can be floated. It's not a silicate, which is apatite dominantly. There is some there is some allanite there, the silicate. Apatite's the one you want, the phosphate. Monazite, the phosphate as well, that's there in significant concentrations. So without going into the exact numbers, importantly, and we weren't surprised by this, we weren't too worried about this risk because they actually floated some of the rare earths in a batch program, Outokumpu, in the early 70s, and hence the lanthanide dump. They put some of it through the processing plant and attempted to recover and got up to about 83% recovery on their what was a pretty rough batch. We don't have a lot of data, but we've recovered what we can from the Outokumpu libraries. And so we knew at an early stage that it wasn't a high risk allanite silica difficulty, which are, people are working on that problem that is relevant to our project in Jockey Kangas further north. But importantly, without minimising the work to be done, it does seem to be the lower risk phosphate-based material.
As with rare earths, it's so important that this metallurgy that ticks the boxes. So yeah, like you say, if this is a simple flotation, then that's going to be huge. And 83% recoveries, that's quite exciting, especially back in the 70s. So we're
we're lucky to hire a metallurgist in Mark Stimson to guide us through a test work program with our friends at Mining School, Oulu and GTK. So obviously there's some work to be done, and that's back not being circular, but that's the bulk of the grant funds to go on that work.
Great. We'll just round out with some drill intercepts that you've recently had, because you've had some pretty impressive numbers. Just a couple of days ago, or end of last week, I think, you announced 4 meters at 5.1%. Could you just throw out a couple of other intercepts?
Well, I mean, I think, for me, one of the early intercepts we announced, KR287 from memory, was in the order of 18 meters at 2% rare earths. And then the key point and we've got about 30 or 40 of intercepts like that now, and then soon there'll be more. But the key point about that KR289 was, and that was drilled in the 70s, it was unsampled, completely pristine in the racks. And so when you look at it, you have your normal geological skeptics hat on. Why wasn't this sampled? And then until we put the portable XRF on it, we realised, yes, we do have to send it to the lab. And what we have there is over 2% rare earths, I think, for this part of the world, where you've got already mining infrastructure in place. We think that those repeated type intercepts, every batch we get 1 or 2 flyers. Like with every ASX release we do, obviously there's usually about a dozen intercepts. I think our next ASX release will have double that number, but that's just the maths. We've got over, as you alluded to in your last briefing on Euro Mining News, there's over 700 samples still to be reported. Mm-hmm. We'll report the vast bulk of those in the short term through the good work of GTK cutting and dispatching the core, ALS, and as well as a contractor, Palsatech at Chemi, who've been lightening the load, because we basically choke the system. Like normal people who visit the library only sample 1 or 2 holes, and we've asked them to sample 200.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of dry eyes when we left. We finished our recent campaign in April. They weren't sad to see us leave for a while, because there's just so much assaying work to be done that we've divided the work up, and that's paying dividends now with most of those assays due shortly.
I also noticed you were behind the core saw for a little bit there. I love to see a MD jumping in, getting their hands dirty. So
that was and it's always tough because remember that was well, it's not tough, it's the job, but that was the first time we had cut core with our own facility and own equipment at the Korsnas Mine Museum itself at the mine. But prior to that, someone else was always cutting for us, whether it's GTK or Pulsatec. And so we had to go from 0 to cutting 6 holes quickly. And sadly, there are a lot of intercepts. I know that sounds like an odd thing to say, but yeah, there was a lot of cutting. But the guys, and we did have some local support as well. Importantly, we're expat light. Most of the workers are either Slovak or Finn, and they learnt very quickly. In fact, innovated the core setup. But yeah, that's right. I cut probably 70% of the 6 holes. And I think it was important to do that because whether I like it or not, our senior geologist, Jacob Bukovina from Slovakia, is a better geologist than me. So it's better he does the logging and the sampling. And no, I was just put to good use. A small team, you all contribute.
That's good to hear that you got faith in your geos. Yeah, okay. Well, I think we'll round it out there. As far as news flow to be expecting, like you said, you've got a lot of samples waiting to come back from the assay lab. We should be expecting an inferred resource estimate sometime in the next few weeks, and then also some metallurgy results. Was there anything I missed there?
No, that's right. I mean, we're just trying to manage expectation, I guess, with news flow, but it is coming fairly thick, and we encourage people to go to the website or look at the last press release where my contact details are. If they're interested in owning a small piece of the company, let us know.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Jason, and look forward to seeing what happens in Prospech in the future. Now, just as a disclaimer for our viewers here, none of this is financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, neither is Jason, and so these are just our personal views. So please don't use this information for anything in that regard. And see you again next time, Jason.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Euro Mining News. Appreciate it.
Cheers.